Mixing metal synths. If you're struggling to put your metal leads, pads or impacts in the mix, this video is for you. Some more wage war, let's check it out. Yeah, this production turned out quite cool with those additional elements. Let's digest and see how you can put the similar synths in the mix, process them, and make sure that they fit well. To me, mixing metal synths has never been a big issue, and actually, I always kept this process somewhat simple, with one key thing in mind. You can treat your metal synths similarly to how you treat your high-gain guitars or even lead guitars, and apply similar kind of processing, similar kind of saturation, similar kind of treatment for the low end, and similar kind of effects such as reverbs and delays. And once you do that, these come into the mix quite nicely. Let's dive into it. Hey, I'm Dr. Mike Trubetskov, and I'm here to bring valuable information on metal production, recording, and mixing. So, mate, please like and subscribe so that the value travels around and reaches your mates. I want to highlight that I also offer a coaching sessions, group or individual ones, where we open your projects, listen to your productions, recording or mixes, and analyze them together in order to resolve any of your challenges in real time as a group or individually. So, if this is of interest, I will leave the link for the coaching session in description. Let's do it. The first thing that we're gonna focus on, and this is probably the most demanded information out there, are the synths that follow the guitar. So I have made a few tutorials about that, and I will go into this once again. Here is the synth that follows the guitar. I'll solo the two for you first. Let's take a listen. Obviously, you can tweak these, modify to the context of the song, but in this case, they work quite well, and these are processed. Now, let's disable the processing for these and see how they sound raw. With the guitars. And now back with the processing and guitars in solo as well. You can see how much more contained the low end is and how these synths do not jump out of the mix. And if they would have jumped out, they would have caused issues on your mix bus and master bus with your limiter and multiband compressor if you have any with the low end. So this is a very important step to make this fit in the mix. However, you can hear that the raw tone is actually not that different. It's not a vast difference. In order for this synth to cut through the mix, we need more distortion. And I'm gonna use Buster's, as always, Saturn trick, where we distort the mid-range and the top end significantly more with the worm tape algorithm. So without, and now with. Basically tilts the synth and saturates it with the extra harmonics so that it is evenly occupied in the frequency range. And next up, I simply cleaned up some of the lower mids, some of the honk, this one here, and then the whistle. You can see that you don't need to do too much. There's a bit of a build-up here, but this build-up is not harsh because there are no specific frequencies that jump out. And then the low end, the actual sub-region, you can boost a little bit because that's where that synth would stand out in the mix, as opposed to the guitars, which would occupy the upper low range here. Another thing that you could do with this synth that mirrors the guitar, you could try using an amp sim which would sound like this. This is obviously way too gainy, so we may drop the input. We get it harder. This sounds more like a guitar, but not necessarily in a bad way, and that could be a production trick for you to apply if you want the synth to be less digital and more hidden in the mix. For your pads and atmospheric elements, let's solo this out. The approach is somewhat similar to how you would treat an ambient lead or ambient clean guitar. All I've done here is I used the right preset, which you can get to, link in description. And also I used this supermassive, the long decay for the reverb, to have that ambience prolonged in a nice way. I've added some extra delay for these synths, which sounds like this. It's a quarter note delay with heavy filters. And all you have left is the mid-range, which does not interfere with the low end of your mix and doesn't sound harsh, but creates that spatial element. You can further add more reverb to this as well if you wish. Let's now look into the impacts and the subs, as this is a very important trick, and I believe that not many people use the right processing for the subs. In order for the subs to cut through, particularly on mobile phones, you need more information rather than the actual sub range. You need some mid-range. And in order to achieve that, you need to add distortion to those elements. Here, let's look into this sub drop. This is distorted very heavily. On the actual bass, I use L1, the L1. And you can see it is heavily smashed. If you add the other impacts here and listen to the whole thing, that's what happens. Without, it sounds weak and it sounds clean. If we listen to that impact bass without the limiter in the context of the mix, the impacts sound clean and balanced but do not cut through at all. If we enable it now, the additional harmonics introduced by heavy limiting help the impacts to cut through and sound more powerful, and that's exactly what you want. Finally, the important bit is the reverb that you apply to your synths. And there are two types of reverbs. We have already discussed the long, massive kind of reverb, and another approach to this is obviously using Valhalla Shimmer. However, the other reverb is the kind of gluing reverb that puts the synths somewhat back in the mix, depending on how much you add to this, and just makes them sound a bit nicer. For that reverb, if we solo these synths out here, you can use a heavy room preset or similar. Depending on the context, you can also try a plate. You could contain the low end by applying some filtering, as per here. You can flip the phase of this reverb, similarly to how Buster processes his reverbs, so that it doesn't interfere and build with the actual signal, and then you could compress it too. See how much tighter it becomes with slow attack and slow release? So, now without the reverb, I'll bring it in now. That's where it should be. to me just adds a little bit of extra depth and niceness to those synth elements, make them sparkle a bit more and just saturate them with the space in a nice way. Hey, and that's really it. I don't want to overcomplicate this video. There's a lot more I could talk about regarding synth mixing, and I definitely will. But for this one, I would like for you to have a takeaway that if you approach synths similarly to how you approach guitars, if you contain your low end and if you smash your impacts with a limiter, you'll be right to go. I'm Dr. Trubetskov. I really hope that this video serves you useful. Leave the comment if you have any questions, and until next time, take care.